Francis Fukuyama.
Oh, Fukuyama, yes. Yeah.
And he said Russia faces outright defeat and sudden collapse in Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, he has to say that because he's been predicting, as you know, the end of history and the conversion of the world into this globalist community of nihilists, Marxists, atheists, and multiculturalists. So if he suggests that there's any other possible outcome, especially with Russia that has rejected open borders, rejected denationalization, the kind of thing that has been underway in Western Europe and here in the United States, then he's effectively admitting failure. He'll have to go down with his proverbial ship. So he's going to claim that Russia is doomed until the last Russian expires in about 500 or 600 years.
And then we have the Senator Risch from Idaho. He goes, fighting Russians. He said, no, I wouldn't call it World War III. It would end pretty quickly, I think, because with the conventional forces that he's had there, meaning Putin, we haven't seen this kind of ineptness in a long, long time, so I'm not concerned about this.
Well, first of all, you should look up Senator Risch's donors. That's very enlightening. If you want to understand, as you know, and you pointed this out before, you want to know why these people say the things they do, why they vote for the policies they do, understand their donors. Everyone is donor-focused on the Hill, not interested in the American people. Now, Risch is saying this presumably because he wants to minimize the fear that any healthy American would have of a war with Russia that could ultimately escalate to the nuclear level. And the other thing that he doesn't bother telling anybody is that if it got to the point that he's talking about, where the Russians thought they were at war with us, the Russians would mobilize the country. I don't think we're prepared to mobilize anybody. Russia has excellent societal cohesion. No one's confused about who and what they are in Russia. They're Russians, and they will fight for Russia. When you go to Western Europe, you run into people who are almost as confused as we are about who and what they are and about what the purpose of everything is. But I think this whole thing is just, it's a wag the dog moment. People are trying to cash in on this for some of the reasons that you mentioned. But look, the Italians have already said, we're not going to war with Russia. We're not contributing to this disaster. The Hungarians have said no thanks. The Croats have said no thanks. I don't see any evidence that the Bulgarians are interested. They'll host a couple of F-15s from the Netherlands who want to go down there and fly for training. But I don't see much happening. The Romanians, they have a lot of experience with the Russians, and the Romanian military certainly doesn't want to refamiliarize with that. All of this is nonsense. This is going to end sooner than anybody thinks. But it's lasted longer than most anticipated. And part of the reason for that is Putin doesn't want to kill large numbers of people in eastern Ukraine. And he's held back his forces. And if anything, when I look at the forces over there, they are remarkably better than what I remember of the Soviet armed forces in the 80s. When I saw them in the 80s, they were a lot of very unhappy, miserable conscripts who didn't want to be in service at all. The gap between officers and enlisted was like the Grand Canyon. I don't see that with this force. I see them as having behaved remarkably well. And you just look at the way they wear their uniforms, look how they behave at railheads. I mean, I could go on and on. This is a better force than existed 25, 30, 40 years ago. But it's a small force because it was never designed to do more than it's done. It's essentially a defensive force. It's not designed to attack Western Europe or Eastern Europe or anywhere else. The Europeans know that. That's why they haven't been willing to spend very much money on defense, because they don't feel threatened. Now we're pointing to this and saying, see, you were wrong. This is a danger to you. But the Russians do not want to cross the Dnieper River. They've only surrounded Kiev because they are compelled to do so, trying to bring the Ukrainians to their senses and sign up for the terms. And what are the terms? Number one term, neutrality for Ukraine. Period. No bloc membership. Cannot be aligned. Number two, recognize the independence of the Russians who live in the Donbass republics. Let them alone. Respect their desire to be Russians. And then finally, renounce any claim to Crimea. It was never part of Ukraine. It was always part of Russia. Let's discard this construct that really emerges as a result of Nikita Khrushchev having a drinking contest with his friends from Kiev and the old Communist Party. We refuse to even consider those things. And I think we're telling Zelensky, you just hang in there. You just hang in there. Meantime, how many millions of people have run to the West, leaving their homes? How many tens of thousands of Ukrainian troops are actually already dead? How many more are likely to perish pointlessly? We don't know the numbers, and we can't believe the numbers that are told to us by almost anyone. You certainly can't believe anything that comes out of Kiev. So the bottom line is, how much longer do we want this to go? Because we're the ones that could immediately step forward. The president could step forward and say, Mr. Putin, we agree. Ukraine must be neutral. It need not be a member of NATO. We will back President Zelensky on that point. And we are willing to sit down and support a conference to hammer out the remaining issues in a way that is mutually beneficial and acceptable to all parties. That is how great powers used to behave. That's how they ended conflicts. We're not doing any of it. Everyone seems to want this to get worse, if anything else.
You mentioned earlier about the mentality in Washington. These are a bunch of stupid people, arrogant, never worked a day in their life, most of them, been sucking off the public tit. And they're, again, look at their track record. Nothing but losses. And this guy, as I mentioned, this Risch, whatever his name is, he goes, we haven't seen this kind of ineptness in a long, long time. I'd say, hey, fat mouth, how about the Iraq war? What about the Afghan war? Oh, that wasn't ineptness and ineptness? What, a couple of months ago when you pulled out and Biden shot off his mouth that, no, Taliban won't go into Kabul or take over Afghanistan? Oh, what kind of ineptness are you talking about? America hasn't won a war since World War II.
Look at the debacle at the Kabul airport.
Yeah.
I mean, it was incomprehensible. It was a clown show. It had no business happening the way it did. No, I think we're a mess, and our forces are in no position right now to engage anybody anywhere who could actually fight back.
No.
And I think that's one of the reasons that in the Department of Defense, people have run silent. You don't hear anybody over in DOD arguing for a widening war.
Wow.